So that's where we currently stand with regard to standards, but how far have we come? Ronald Singer, past president of AAFS and current chair of the History Committee, joins us now in studio for a little bit of a history lesson. Thanks for your time today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so as the chair of the History Committee, let's start with the evolution of forensic science. How far have we come in 75 years?
Well, I think we've come very far in 75 years. From the very beginning, I think that there was a slow trend toward moving away from bootstrap type science that you would use in a crime laboratory if you came across something that you hadn't seen before and had to think about what can I do with it, to a much more processed kind of scientific endeavor. And I think that what gave it the best push, of course, was the report of the National Academies of Science in 2009 that pointed out a lot of the flaws or shortcomings of forensic science as it was being practiced at that time. Since then, we've moved very rapidly to try to validate the methodology that we're using, as well as independent research in the field.
Today we are focusing a lot on the creation and implementation of standards. You just mentioned the validation of methods. Are we in a good place with that?
I think we're moving toward a good place, okay. Yes.
Not there yet.
I don't think, well, in science you're never there yet. But I think for the Academy and for forensic science as a whole, the implementation of standards and best practices and that sort of thing is something that was sorely needed for a long time in many of the disciplines. Some of the forensic disciplines had that all along because they were much more related to scientific processes that were already ongoing in other areas. But much of forensic science is innovative, and that's the areas where standards are going to become very important, validation of methods is going to become very important, and that's where we're moving now.
And you also say that it's very important to recognize limitations.
Oh, absolutely, yes. One of the main issues that has come up in court many times, is error rates, or how sure are you of this? And when I got started 50 years ago in forensic science, much of what we testified to was absolute. We would say that bullet was fired from that gun to the exclusion of all others in the universe. Well, obviously we don't know that. We have never examined all other firearms in the universe. What we were testifying to was a kind of a gut feeling that we had based on what we knew from the science of metallurgy, and I'm using firearms as an example, but there are others as well. And that doesn't cut it anymore in court because attorneys want to know, well, how sure are you? What is the error rate? And if you say it's 100%, you're automatically disqualified because nothing in science is 100%. So yes, there are limitations, and much of the field is kind of slow in recognizing that there are limitations, but I think we're all coming around now.
You've mentioned junk science previously, yes. And how do we make sure that that is kept out of both our laboratories and the courtroom?
Well, that's an interesting question because the way the court system is set up, of course, if you have a novel science that you want to introduce into court, basically the judge listens to testimony about how you approached these results and the scientific basis behind what you're doing, and then decides. And unfortunately, most judges on the courts today are not scientists, of course. They're coming up through the law, which generally means they're liberal arts majors, and so they're really not in a position to understand that. The definition of junk science changes depending on who you talk to, but basically junk science is something that is introduced into the court that has little or no scientific basis.
Interesting. So one little bit of junk science comes into the courtroom and it undermines everything that's actually factually correct.
Yes, and what happens, of course, is that when it gets approved or in one court and the judge allows it, then that's precedent for another court to allow it, and then before you know it, it becomes an accepted testimony in court, and there's little or no science behind it. And I think the thing that is maybe going to limit that in the future is that defense attorneys are becoming, well, all attorneys, I guess would be the best way to say it, are becoming more savvy about that and are becoming much more literate about what can be done and what can't be done. And you know, there are people out there now who are willing to step forward and say, no, there is no basis for this in court. And so as that progresses, I think what we'll see is that more and more of it will be used less and less.
Good. Wonderful. All right. Well, Ronald, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate this little trip down memory lane.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.